The American Society on Aging was founded in 1954. 66 years later, people are living prosperous and longer lives. However, many are living with social and economic inequities and inequalities. And the pandemic, it has reminded us that this country doesn't embrace aging. What will happen in 10 years when 1 in 5 Americans will be over 65? The American Society on Aging is transforming itself to tackle the challenges and invest in the opportunities that this demographic change will bring. The new ASA reflects our year-long programming and meaningful membership experience. The new ASA reflects our commitment to unite, to empower, and to champion all of you. But most importantly, the new ASA reflects our optimism for the future of aging. On behalf of everyone at the American Society on Aging, I am proud to introduce you to the new ASA.
Learn more and join us at www.asaging.org.
Welcome, everyone, from all over the world. I'm Ken Dychtwald, and I'll be the moderator of the Legacy Interviews. Today, it's my very special privilege to be interviewing Paul Nathanson. In addition to being an old friend, Paul is a true national leader in the world of legal services and elder justice. He's dedicated his entire career to ensuring that legal service lawyers on the national, state, and local levels address barriers for those who face the largest disparities in health and wealth. Paul founded Justice and Aging, formerly the National Senior Citizens Law Center, 49 years ago in 1972. Paul is the past president of the American Society on Aging, and he's a founding member of the American Bar Association Commission on Law and Aging. He's also served as national secretary of the Gray Panthers and is a past chair of the board of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. He's the recipient of both the American Society on Aging Award and also the American Society on Aging Hall of Fame Award for decades of effective advocacy on behalf of low-income seniors. Paul's a graduate of Duke University and also the University of Chicago. So let me welcome Paul Nathanson. But first of all, how are you, Paul?
I'm doing well, thank you. I mean, this has been a tough year, and but I'm fine. Thank you very much, and I'm excited. I think this is a really exciting project you've got.
I can't help but notice that there is something behind you there. So, like, what are we dealing with here? What is that?
It's a gnome, which was in the movie Amélie, which is a French movie. I don't know how many of you have seen it. And I guess I did it as a joke to put that back there. The thought being that I wanted to make a point, actually, which is that my experience in the field of advocacy is that oftentimes individuals take themselves very seriously, even when their issues are important. But my view has been that the individual is not important, other than as being an advocate, but the issue is important. And I also think that it's important, and you and I have experienced this, to have fun doing this work and to have a sense of humor. And having a sense of humor does not at all automatically mean that you're thinking lightly of the issues and the problems and difficulties that you're addressing in the work you do. I just thought there was a contrast that would make. I hope it doesn't take too much attention from me, but anyway, I'm kidding.
Well, I must admit, my guess is you'll be the only of our 12 interviews that has a gnome sitting on a chair behind you. But then again, you know, we're just getting started. So
yeah, but I see you have something behind you.
Well, you know, I do. I've got the Mickey Mouse character from Sorcerer's Apprentice and Fantasia. So maybe there's a pattern we'll see here. Hey, but we got a lot to cover in this hour together. But before we get into the kind of the serious questions and answer stuff, I'm going to pull up a couple of pictures here. And maybe you can just give me a word or two about what we're looking at. So let's get this picture up full screen.
Okay.
All right. Well, so what do we got here? Who are these people?
Okay, just having had a wonderful Father's Day on Zoom, at least with my kids. This is my son, Ben, to the left of me in the picture, my son, David, and my daughter, Danielle. So those are my three children. And I'm there with the my Frank Sinatra look with the open bow tie. And the
All
one
right,
thing
now-
I taught my sons was how to teach a bow tie.
All right, so
This-
what do we got here? Is this
this
a make-believe picture or is this like a real?
No, this was real. This was, I went to a few of the President Obama's Christmas parties, and I was honored to be asked. And for this one, my son Ben was my date. We had a lovely time. By this point, I think I probably had 3 or 4 martinis and holding on to Michelle's hand. And she was, well, they were both lovely. I mean, it was really a lovely evening and event.
All right, so I got a picture out of a kind of a rogues gallery that you haven't seen. Who are these characters?
Aha. Well, they are very good friends. They are you and Fernando Torres Hill, who I understand will be an interviewee in the project. And again, you can see the smile. We're having fun. I mean, we're serious stuff, but you can tell that we're laughing and we really like being with each other.
Okay, so there was a period where you were the vice provost at the University of Mexico.
New Mexico,
excuse me.
Sure.
What's going on here in this picture here, my friend?
Well, the whole thing was I just sort of wanted to relate to younger people. And at that point, this was sort of a way of doing that. And I decided I'd let my hair grow and, I had a ponytail by and large.
You weren't ever with the Eagles, were you?
No, I was not. But anyway, that was it. It was not much more to it than that.
Okay, so you got to walk us through what's this picture, because this one's got a lot going on in here.
Well,
who was that gal you were standing beside?
That's Maggie Kuhn, who was, for those who don't know, and I know you do because you're friends with her, Maggie Kuhn, the founder of the Gray Panthers. And she sponsored through the U.S.-China Friendship Association a trip to China. There were about 15 of us. And this was in 1976, sort of just at the end of the Cultural Revolution, when everybody was still wearing Mao jackets and Mao hats. I remember going into a store and I turned around and there were about 300 people staring at me. Anyway, that's Maggie and where there were several others who went on that trip. Steve McConnell, Ira Hirschfield, Tish Summers from who founded ultimately OWL and the Displaced Homemakers project.
Let me pause there just for 1 second. And so Tish Summers, OWL. OWL stands for Older Women's League. I bet there's many people on this Zoom experience or on this call here who may not even know what that is or was. What was that?
Well, it grew out of Tish Summers, who's from the Bay Area, was I think divorced or widowed at a late age. Had no really financial resources, and she created a program called the Displaced Homemakers. I think it was Project. And from that grew OWL, which was the Older Women's League, which advocated for really the situation that a lot of older women found themselves in when they were alone, either divorced, widowed, or never married, and in financial difficulties. And so they advocated they had a Washington office and I think chapters all around. They were in some ways tied to the Gray Panthers.
Got it. Okay, so we found this picture. This was from New Orleans, and it's a picture of 2 young models. I believe that model on the right was you.
Yes.
Can you come up with any explanation that would allow you to continue to respect you?
No, probably not. That was just a fellow who owned a clothing shop. Asked me, and this was actually the homecoming queen at Tulane, where I went to undergraduate school. And they asked us to model. And this was actually not the school newspaper, it was in the Times-Picayune. We did several shots like this about his clothes in his shop. That was, totally.
All right, so I'm gonna pull these pictures down. So it's just the 2 of us for a little while here. And I'm gonna ask you to just be as open and as candid as you feel like being, because we're going to dig around in some interesting areas during our time together. First, and this might sound quirky, but let's just imagine it's a few decades from now. I'm gone, you're gone. It's another era. How is it you'd like for people to think of Paul Nathanson?
That's interesting because, as I've mentioned in the past, we wrote a thing called the Values History, which AARP published in its national magazine, which was trying to understand for decision makers about older people what their values were. And one of the questions was, how would you like to be remembered? What would you like as your epitaph? And again, relating to the gnome, my real thought was that he was a good guy. He cared about people. He was a mentor, and we miss him. Obviously, then there are the creation of the Law Center, and hopefully it'll still be around, and the issues that it's focused on. I'm not diminishing that at all, but on a very personal level, I'd like to be remembered as having been a decent, good person who cared for others and mentored young people, as I know you do. And I think it's really wonderful.
So as a young man, you, after lots of education, you found yourself with a law degree, and I know you went to work for a hotshot law firm. What made you decide to get interested in issues of justice and equity? And
the aging. Well, I guess I always, even going into law school, I really didn't think I wanted to end up with a large law firm. And I got out to Los Angeles, and it was a wonderful, Melvin and Myron's big firm. Warren Christopher, former Secretary of State and Attorney General, actually ended up hiring me. He was at the firm. But I figured out I really didn't care. First of all, they were on the wrong side on every issue. They represented Union Oil in the Santa Barbara oil sick case, CBS against the Smothers Brothers. Wrong side from my perspective. And I figured out I really didn't care about keeping rich people rich. We were in Pershing Square downtown and walked around and saw a lot of older people pushing their worldly possessions around in a shopping cart. I was working on pension plans at the firm in the tax department. And I also saw, there were these promises. This is pre-ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, the pension law. And people were promised pensions, and it was almost like when you went to college. You look on the right, look on the left, one of you may get a pension. It was very, almost illusory. And that bothered me. The pictures on the booklets were always waving goodbye on your trip to Europe or going to the bank to get your check. And there are other things. I never had any grandparents that I knew. So I had a sense of missing the aging population. And one last thing, if I've got time to say it, when I was a junior in college, I was in Switzerland, and I took a tour in Athens, and I sat behind an elderly couple that had saved all their lives. They were of Greek extraction to go to the Acropolis. And we got there and they couldn't walk up the steps. And that got to me about how the society sort of, in certain ways, told us to work hard, which we should, but then also forgot about us at a later age.
You just mentioned that you didn't have grandparents that had an impact on you. Many people working in the aging field, as it turns out, had good relationships with their grandparents, or that's what drew them into the field. Why did you have no relationship with your grandparents?
Well, they were dead. My parents were refugees from Berlin, Jewish German refugees, left late in 1939. Their fathers had both died already in the 1930s, and their mothers, unfortunately, died in the concentration camps. So I never knew them. One of the other things that I tried, that aging taught me, when I was older and I had young children, I really tried to be a grandparent to them in certain ways. In other words, to say if there was a fire engine going someplace, instead of as a father saying, I got to get to work and you have to go to school, I said, all right, let's follow the fire engine. So I don't know, that sort of influenced in a lot of ways. And songs, we talked at one point about Bette Midler and John Prine, Hello in There, that song, although that was a little later. So there were a bunch of influences, but especially in terms of justice, I throughout law school, I really felt that I cared about the most vulnerable and disadvantaged, and of course then went to this law firm, but I was only there a few years.
So you made a decision early on. You could have pursued a path where you'd make a great deal of money and maybe have a certain kind of life, but instead you took notice of the fact that there were people who were disenfranchised or vulnerable or fragile in some ways, and you decided then to focus on trying to make things better for those people.
Right. And let me actually add, one of the senior partners, a fellow named Maynard Toll, who was the clerk for Justice Frankfurter, he was the most senior partner at the firm, actually spent lots of afternoons talking about these issues. And he encouraged me in many ways to think about providing legal services and advocacy for the elderly poor.
So you had a choice as a young man to pursue a path that might cause you to be wealthy, have some kinds of influence in legal circles, but you took notice of the fact that there were vulnerable older adults that were struggling, and you decided to commit yourself to helping them. And 49 years ago, before a lot of people watching this might have even been alive, you created what now called Justice in Aging. What were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, again, as is the case, it was funded by the Office of Economic Opportunity and which Maggie Kuhn called the skirmish, rather than the war on poverty, the skirmish on poverty. We were supposed to be providing support and advocacy tools to the legal services lawyers all around the country. We actually were given a Washington office. We had a Sacramento office initially, an LA office, and actually an Oakland office. So we worked with California Rural Legal Assistance initially. But, so we were supposed to be providing advocacy, which included legislative advocacy, litigation, training. And one of the things that happened when we started, and I look back on this as maybe the major achievement in the early years, we would go to legal services lawyers and say, we need you to do more for the elderly. And I was working on pension plans, and I tried to make that sexy by talking about how the Kennecott Copper pension fund had overthrown Allende, so it made it, like it was really radical stuff in Chile. But I think that they basically said, look, we're already busy. We don't have enough time. We're already doing welfare stuff. And then I went to the aging community, the area agencies, and they basically said, well, we've asked on a survey, do you have legal problems? And that was not a very good question because, it came down very low on the priorities. Instead of asking, have you ever not gotten your Social Security check, or have you ever been evicted, or asking factual questions. So the main thing that we did initially was work on amending the Older Americans Act, which perhaps some area agencies now still don't like, amending it to provide mandating legal services funding for the elderly, and that so that I could then go to the legal aid lawyers and say, there's money there in order to do this work. And that obviously enticed. And we worked with Senator Kennedy and Senator John Tunney from California on doing that legislation, and Congressman John Bradamus from Indiana, who I think later became president of NYU or something. So we amended the Older Americans Act, and that started providing specific Title III funding to legal services for the elderly. And I think that was a big achievement. And then in the beginning, again, we wanted to make sure that there was due process, that these procedures were in place, that you had a right to a hearing, that you could get, benefits by having a chance to testify. Issues like that were the initial things we worked on. And and if I'm going on too long, tell me. One last thing was that President Nixon had signed into law the SSI legislation, Supplemental Security Income Program, which is a benefit to the elderly, blind, and disabled who are poor. And no one really knew anything about that program. So we were given that to train legal aid lawyers about, traveled all over the country doing it.
You were very involved with the Gray Panthers back in the 70s. I was, but less so compared to you. What was the attraction for you of the Gray Panthers?
Well, number one, Maggie was an attraction because she was so dynamic and feisty, and as you know, said do something outrageous every day, and had a great sense of humor and at the same time sense of mission. What I really liked was that the intergenerational approach to problems. I mean, the Gray Panthers, in my mind, as opposed to many of the aging organizations, really cared about both ends of the age spectrum, about the vulnerable populations. A lot of aging organizations wanted young people to get interested in older people's problems and focus on them. But the Gray Panthers, they were picketing the war in Vietnam. They were doing all kinds of things. And then I got to know Maggie, and then we became National Senior Citizens Law Center actually became the legal counsel to the Gray Panthers on numerous lawsuits involving due process, Medicare, and various other federal programs. So, and we did a lot of educational programs with the Gray Panthers.
So I think the tagline was youth and age in action, or aging youth in action.
Something, yeah, exactly. And they walk the talk about it.
So you just made a point in passing that some of the aging organizations are focused on making things better for older people. So what's wrong with that?
Well, there's nothing wrong with it. I just think that in many ways, the disenfranchised, the people who are marginalized, have a lot in common. And sure, as an advocacy tool, you separate into different groups. You might say people of color, women, different organizations. But in many ways, the problems are similar. And to the extent you could have a larger view of problems, I think that informs how you work. And at least it did me and us.
If you were to pick an age at which people ought to be eligible for various old age benefits, what would that age be?
Well, I know that 65 was actually done by Otto von Bismarck in Germany for the German pension program, because I don't think anyone lived that long. It really depends. Because I think, and again, President Obama deserves a lot of credit for bringing in an expansion of healthcare. I think we need to have healthcare benefits really for everyone at every age, people who are vulnerable. I think, the old people who are, let's say 85 plus, are probably the most vulnerable, the most likely to have dementia, the most likely to be in care settings. I don't know that age, I mean, you need age, I guess you need an age, although I'd love to see, look at need. Although let me caveat that I don't think that Social Security, some people have proposed making Social Security a needs-based program. I think that would be a terrible mistake, because you'd lose the support of the middle class. And the SSI program, the welfare program, has not been amended, has really not been changed since 1972, because it's a welfare program. And people in this country have a certain view of welfare recipients. I think, if I may say, I think there's a race component, although the vast majority of food stamps and all these other benefits, Medicaid, go to white people. The perception is that there's people of color who are, the welfare mom cheating that Reagan talked about. I think those things aren't accurate. So I'd like to see us focus broadly on. It's hard to pick an age. Let me put it that way.
All right. So Paul, so you referred to an idea that hasn't really carried forward, but back decades and decades ago, there was a very formidable figure in our field whose name hardly ever gets mentioned, Bernice Newgarden, University of Chicago. And she felt that organizing people by age was nonsense, and that various segments of need, or young, old, very old, but she thought that the age thing was a mistake. Why do you think that Bernice's work has not remain popular or even known about?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. My sense is that for politicians, it's easier to have an age, because first of all, you're looking at that demographic 60 and above or 65 and above, and you're saying these are the people, at least in the past, who have been the big voters. So my sense is that they want to use age as a way of saying, look, we've benefited older people over 60, over 65, and we want you to vote for us. Because Bernice's work was fabulous. And again, I used the term old, which she coined. I do think that as you get older, there are different things that happen, especially when you get to the 85 plus age.
So when you got in the field, and you and I know the demography a little bit, older people back 40 or 50 years ago were about 80 to 85% white. That's just the way America is demographically made up. Now we're increasingly moving towards being a minority majority in the years to come. What sensitivity was there towards people of color or people of different race or sexual persuasions in the early years of gerontology, as you know that?
I don't think much at all. I mean, I think, and one of the things that I'm very excited about, Kevin Prindiville, the executive director of Justice and Aging now, and the staff have started really a special focus on people of color and women and the LGBT community. I think they were forgotten for many years, again, because the perception by middle class whites that there were welfare cheaters out there. And of course, my view is there are cheaters at everything, and rich people cheat, and they cheat for real money.
So I got a personal question to ask you. Then I want to ask you some questions about the field, and then about aging itself. So being an advocate can't always feel good. You're running into opponents, you're running into challenges. How have you kept yourself going, Paul? How do you keep your wits about you?
Well, part of it is the gnome, not this particular gnome, but sense of humor. Working, I guess maybe the biggest thing is in the context of working with wonderful people. I mean, the field of poverty law, legal services, the field of aging has drawn some amazing individuals. And I mentioned when we've talked earlier that at one point I wanted to be an anthropologist. And so I liked the whole look at the field of aging and was so excited. My first board had on it, Carl Eisdorfer, Eli Cohen, Cy Brickfield, Nelson Cruikshank. So I got an overview of this demographic, and it really interested me.
Okay, so think of the field of aging.
And also the wonderful lawyers and stuff advocates that I work with.
So think of the field of aging. You've been president of ASA, you've played a key role in this field. How has it evolved over the past half century? And has it evolved enough?
I don't think it's evolved enough. I don't think it's evolved enough in what I mentioned earlier, the intergenerational context. I don't think I think lip service is paid to women and people of color, because especially in this day and age, you can't sort of not in the LGBTQ community. I mean, if you look at older women, many of whom have been discriminated against all their lives in the types of jobs that they had, in the fact that those jobs didn't provide pensions, that they were underpaid compared. So I don't think people focused very much on that. It was rare. I mean, we did some pension work because I had done it at the law firm with Senators Javits and Williams on the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. But I think still there are major problems in focusing and not focusing on women and women of color. Look at all the caregiving that is unpaid for in this country. And even if it's the daughter-in-law, she's doing, I'm making generalizations, the caring for the mother of the son of her husband, all unpaid for. And people have talked about trying to amend Social Security to cover some of that because basically you don't get a benefit for that.
Okay, so let me ask you kind of an edgy question. If people like you and other members of this group that I'll be interviewing over the coming weeks, if we feel that the field has not done enough, or it's not got enough funding, or hasn't saved enough lives, then what's wrong with us? I mean, what's wrong with the leadership of this field that it has not been as effective as it should have been?
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, I do think we need to push the issues, as I said, of women, people of color, the LGBTQ community, and leadership. You know, I would go to, even when I was president of ASA, I would go to the meetings of the Gay Lesbian Alliance or people of color, and the only people there were people of color or gay community. The mainstream aging community was not there at those meetings, and so that has to change. And it has to, I think, in a big picture, we have to change in the sense of seeing the commonality of these issues. I mean, many of these women, women in general, women of color, have been the cornerstone, the keystone of their community. And, you know, they've taken care of everybody, and all of a sudden, there they are. They're poor, they're alone, they're happy, they're lucky if they can live on Social Security. SSI is $750 some odd or $60 a month. Try to live on that if you're living on the SSI program.
So what should the field of aging be? And let's think of it as a field. What should it be if it were to be better or more effective or more able to make people's lives better as we age? What changes would you make in the field?
Well, I would like, again, in some ways from Maggie, to have it be a leader in issues beyond aging. Because there is a commonality. I understand if your job is to be the director of the area agency on aging or the state unit on aging, you've got to deal with aging. But to the extent that there's a field, and there are people like yourself and people like Fernando, who's been talking about this, and Purcell, who you're going to interview, I think we should be leaders. For example, the race question. I mean, we have not had, again, my parents were not Holocaust survivors. Well, they suffered from the Holocaust. Germany, to pick an interesting example, has had a conversation, not the first generation perhaps, but the Holocaust Memorial is, 100 yards from the Brandenburg Gate. They haven't hidden it. We have not had a conversation about race. And now you get state legislatures wanting to not even allow high school students to talk about race. So I think we need to be a leader in issues where they're risky. I mean, one of the things Maggie talked about, I'm not worried about losing my job. I ought to be out there on the hutchings, whatever the word is. And as a field, I think we should be leading in some of these discussions, especially I think race is a major problem that has never been discussed fully in this country.
Do you think the aging field has done enough to cause our healthcare system to create healthy aging?
Well, again, it's not just the aging field. You've got politicians. I mean, I think there are proposals now to expand healthcare, to include in Medicare eye and hearing and dental care, which is not there. I think we need to have long-term care in some way or another. I think if I can, I did bring along a quote, if I can read it.
Sure.
From NPR, which to me says what we ought to, as a country, be about. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much, is whether we provide enough for those who have little. And it seems to me that the field of aging, every field, but I mean, because again, we have this community, we ought to be leaders in that. We should say, we don't want a society that says, okay, great, you wait in line for 2 miles to get a box of food put in the trunk of your car, as opposed to having expanded food stamps. The meanness that I see in some politicians vis-a-vis the poor is embarrassing, and it's not a country that it's hard. I mean, FDR would not be proud of that. Let's put it that way.
If there are if you could wave a magic wand and make 3 changes in the way we age in America, what 3 changes would you make?
Wow. Well, again, I'm a big believer, as Maggie was, in aging in intergenerational ways, that we don't segregate older people. I think we should have guaranteed pensions of a limited amount. I mean, at least of an amount that you can live on, and healthcare. I mean, those 3 things, the average person, I mean, look at public pensions now. I mean, we did a lot of work on pension plans, but they've faded away now. Everybody has, if they're lucky, they have an IRA, but so I would hope that the labor movement could be empowered, basically to advocate for benefits, for workers. And again, I think a decent retirement. This is the richest country in the world. I don't see how and why, other than for politics and for the dividing up of the community, we don't provide a base. I'm not talking about everybody should get rich, but in terms of healthcare, if you're on a public program, okay, you don't get your knee replacement tomorrow, but ultimately you can get it. And I feel very strongly about that. And that has not been the fault solely of the aging community. I mean, you play politics, and you've got a lot of politicians who are against those programs.
All right, so I'm going to ask you a question and put you on the spot. You have been alive, I think, since Abraham Lincoln was in office. That's a joke.
Nice guy. Nice guy. I'm sorry you died so.
Well, you've lived a long life. You're 78 now, and you've seen a lot of presidents. Which president would you feel has made the greatest inroads and created the best circumstance for older adults? Well,
I think, again, in recent times, I mean, first of all, I think Harry Truman. I mean, you had, you had Medicare and Lyndon Johnson with the war on poverty, and with Medicaid, the Medicaid program. President Obama with healthcare, which I think hopefully could be expanded. And I mean, this is an outlier, weird, but I think Richard Nixon did a lot. Again, the SSI program, Supplemental Security Income program, and various environmental things. And he even had a program that Senator Moynihan was pushing about, a guaranteed income for people. And again, I don't think, and studies show that people having a basic income makes them lazy. I mean, it makes them feel freer that they can educate their kids, that they can, go to work. Anyway, that's what I think.
What is your proudest accomplishment with justice and aging?
Well, first of all, I'm proud that it's existed for 49 years. We're going to have a 50th anniversary next year. I think one of the first things I mentioned, the idea of having basically now a large network of legal services for the elderly programs who are funded by area agencies on aging. I hope that we will get the SSI, Supplemental Security Income Program, amended, because it's stayed the way it was in 72. We have legislation to do that. Hasn't happened. Personally, I feel like we've had I've spoken in lots of contexts, as have you. I remember Maggie and I, spoke at the Idaho Governor's Conference, or we taught a class in Hawaii on community organizing. I hope that younger people were inspired by, the fact that people gave up, in my case, making millions, whatever, because you had a passion. And my advice to young people really is to find your passion. I don't know, a combination of, I think, creating the legal services for the elderly network, doing a lot of advocacy legislatively on the pension field, and a lot of training and mentoring of younger people in the field and other fields. I mean, so that
let's stay on the younger person theme a little bit, Paul. So if you were to give some advice, because we have a lot of students that have signed up for this program, right, to a young person thinking about, I'm 20, I'm 25, thinking about the rest of my life and pursuing a career maybe having to do with older adults, What advice would you give a young person about pursuit of career?
Well, as I started to say earlier, I think it's really important to try to find your passion. First of all, I think it's important, I find high school students are being asked, what do you want to be? And where do you want to go to college? Because then you'll know, or you already know what you want to be. My answer there is don't know what you want to be. Go out and learn and live and get an education, not only an education in formal sense, but by meeting people and talking and listening. And hopefully from that, finding your passion, number one. And then number two, sort of trying to pick a field, as I did. I wanted to be an anthropologist, but I ended up being a lawyer. But I feel like I read Laura Nader, Ralph Nader's sister's books about how do Sardinian shepherds resolve their disputes. So, I try to take your passion, and then obviously you got to find a job. I do think, by the way, the field of aging, almost anything. I've told people who are not particularly interested in law, whatever you want to do, you want to be a plumber, figure out how to be a plumber for old people. What goes in an old person's toilet or bathroom, or you want to work in nursing homes, or you want to do video. Well, why not do videos as a business of interviewing grandparents for their young people, for their kids to. There's a lot of different things, but I think your passion and then trying to blend reasonable career choices with that passion.
You've been to many aging conferences, American Society on Aging, National Council on Aging, GSA, and so on and so forth. Do you feel the field are populated by the right skills and tasks and personalities, or should that tent be widened?
Well, I don't know if it should be widened. I think, again, I've sort of gone to those meetings and ended up most, other than when I was president of the various groups. No, I think again, I'm pitching the intergenerational piece. I hope that there will be more and more young people, and that we will teach. I would like to see advocacy expanded, and area agencies not being afraid of doing it just because they have a certain tax status. You can do a lot, which is not considered lobbying, by being aggressive. And I think that we need more of that kind of training, more people like that who are willing to lead in the field, both in the subject matter. And again, I hope people who care about the disadvantaged.
So let's switch directions a little bit, Paul. And thanks, by the way, for all your views. And I also want to say, and I'll say it many times on this program and otherwise, thank you for a half a century of commitment to this subject and being, so out in front of so many issues. In an ideal world, what's the ideal role of an older person?
Well, again, I think, and Martha Holstein and others have written about it. Maybe there shouldn't be an ideal. For people themselves, they should have a decent health care, a decent level of income and nutrition. Things that they don't have to worry every day about where they're going to find their next meal. But what they do with their aging. Maggie made fun of people who were living in what she called playpens, senior housing or gated communities. I feel pretty strongly people ought to be able to pick what they want to do. If you've been living a certain life as a hod carrier, doing difficult work, you ought to be able to play golf every day if you want. That's not my business to tell you what to do, but I think there ought to be a basic level of income. Again, I'm not talking about, getting rich and of health care.
So react to me about this. So in the years before COVID, the average retiree, and we have about 70 million or so such folks in America, the average retiree watched 47 hours of television a week, and less than a quarter of America's retirees volunteered in any way. Does that feel right to you?
No. And I know, we've talked about that. I think we have to make sure that we can make volunteerism accessible and known by people who are older. And, it may be that they want to have a volunteer job where they can take off for a month which might not be exactly what a certain group wants. No, I think there ought to be more. And again, picking from Maggie, I mean, I think we should be out there. We have less to lose. I'm not, take me as an example, I'm not worried about losing my job, and I have a decent income. So I would hope we would expand volunteerism, but that entails getting people to know about it and then tailoring it in a way that fits to the older lifestyle. I mean, if I want to take a vacation, I should be able to do it and still come back and volunteer.
So why is ageism so prevalent in our world? And how come those of us who have been trying to make a dent, why have we allowed it to persist?
I don't know. I mean, I think I don't have an answer off the top of my head. I think some of it goes back to advocacy purely for the elderly. When, if you remember the New Republic article, which was about greedy geezers and the perception that old people are well off and that they are sucking up benefits at the expense of younger population. I think, and again, that where I think we should be caring about more broadly. I think there's some of that, the feeling that the elderly are doing fine and they're really trying to dominate. They vote. You get retirees coming down here to Florida, where I now live, and they vote against school bond issues. They say, I voted for school bonds in Minnesota, where I'm from. Why should I vote for a school bond issue here in Orlando or whatever? So, I mean, I think there's a lot of that and some misperceptions. I mean, I think there are lots of wonderful old people who are doing great volunteer work and advocacy work, but I think there's a perception that old people are well off.
So in a few years, because of the aging of the population, what I kind of affectionately call the age wave, about half of the federal budget will be going to Medicare and Social Security. Does that seem about right to you?
Well, again, I haven't crunched the numbers, but I mean, if that would provide what I talked about, a basic income, a basic level of health care, so be it. Maybe we build one less battleship, or maybe we give one less tax break to giant farmers. Not that the farmers are giant, but who have giant farms. Maybe I don't think it's a zero sum. I do think that we can provide a chunk of the budget, and maybe we pay taxes. I'm not embarrassed about paying taxes. This country took my parents in when they had to leave their country. I'm proud to pay. I mean, I don't want to get screwed, but I don't find it an automatic mantra to say, "Oh my God, no taxes." This is a discussion going on right now. We have the money in this country to pay for a lot of these benefits. And just saying we don't pay taxes because we signed some pledge about that is ridiculous.
Last question on this category, and then I'm going to go personal a little bit. This question: what advice would you give for the next generation of change makers in the aging field? And you can have 2 or 3 pieces of advice.
Well, one of the things that I recognized early on about the law and advocacy was that you really needed to be operating in a lot of different levels. So if you want to be a change maker, you need to not only understand the legislative, or have somebody working with you who understands the legislative process, who understands the regulatory, which is the executive branch, and the judicial process. I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, and who worries. This is something that I found challenging. Who worries about how your success in a lawsuit or in a legislative piece actually plays out on the street. We were involved with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We were amicus in a case called Wiesenfeld, which was about the fact that Social Security did not initially have a widower's benefit. And in this case, a woman had been working and she died, and the widower had no benefit. And we filed a lawsuit. And we won in the Supreme Court, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and our group. And about 6 months later, I was sitting in a U.S. Senate hearing next to Mr. Wiesenfeld, who was the plaintiff. And he said, you guys won that case 6 months ago, and I'm still not in the computer. What it said to me was, keep your eye, to quote a song, keep your eye on the prize. The prize is, how does it play out on the street? Does it really make a difference? As opposed to, my mother's proud of me because I won a lawsuit. So I think continuing to focus on the street. If I have time, I have one more example. When the SSI program came in, it had a statute, it had regulations, it had a handbook, it had all kinds of materials. But the only thing that the local district office saw was really a handbook. And in the handbook, there was a provision for an emergency advance payment of $100 if someone came in and looked like they were starving and they needed help. And the manual said, don't tell them about it unless they ask. So that, and then we found out about it because we had to file a lawsuit to get a copy of the manual. They changed it because we obviously made a big deal about it. My point being that you need to be active in a lot of different arenas, not only the federal, but the state arena. Certain things are governed clearly by state law. I mean, school, education, guardianship, many instances of healthcare. Look at the 13 or so states that still have not expanded Medicaid. And why? Even though 90% of that money is coming from the feds, there are states like Florida, which is an embarrassment, frankly.
So it seems to me, and I may get this wrong, Paul, but as I'm listening to you, trying to listen carefully, and knowing that in the coming weeks, I'll be talking to social workers and nurses and psychologists and disability experts and home builders, and you're a lawyer. But that seems to be almost like there's three sides to you. One is a deep understanding and talent with the law. The other is that you seem to have an affinity, an attraction, a respect, a regard, a purpose within the aging subject, the aging field. Right. And third, it seems that morality is what drives you. So right and wrong, helping those who are vulnerable.
You said it a lot better than I did. I was blabbing away here, but no, I think that's exactly right. And again, understanding, even though I may be a lawyer, that there are lots of different aspects. It may be that somebody's not getting SSI or the earned income tax credit or whatever because they don't know about it. So it ought to be an educational aspect. Lawyers don't need to do that, but I think there are pieces that are there for everyone, and there ought to be somebody looking at the totality of that.
Okay, so I asked you a question for the next generation of change makers, and you talked about understanding the law and obviously finding passion in your field, and you're not saying it, but your meta messaging is clearly, do the right thing. What personal quality, now that you're an elder, would you say is needed to be able to kind of fight the system or be a change maker? What personal quality?
All right, this is really
should people seek to cultivate?
One of my sons, Ben, was in the Peace Corps in Nicaragua. And he apparently was a very good volunteer. And they asked him, what would you add to your training for a Peace Corps volunteer? And I thought about it a lot. And I thought about it in some other context. I said, well, everybody ought to have at least a year of therapy. My point being that you should not be serious about yourself, which we started out talking about. You should be confident in yourself so that, for example, if I'm running a program, I want to hire people that are smarter than me. I want other people to succeed. Kevin Prindiville was a deputy when I was there the second time around at Justice and Aging. I didn't want the job. I wanted him to succeed. I wanted him to do better than I did. And that only, and I had no problem when I was teaching or in other contexts in making mistakes. And if you make a mistake, you say, oh, I made a mistake. And yes, you're right. And I think that all stems from having a sense of self confidence. Eleanor Roosevelt said you can get a lot done if you don't worry about who gets credit for it. And if you're not out there looking for the credit, but actually looking to do the right thing, ultimately somebody will know you did it, but most importantly, you'll know. And I think that comes, again, to say it over and over, from self-confidence and not being threatened. I mean, I've had supervisors or heard about supervisors where they give you 3 pieces of the 5 pieces of information you need because they want you to come back and ask for the 2 others. Why would I want something like that? I want people who are smarter than me.
Okay, so let's switch to a personal level here. You and I knew each other. We were in our 20s. We're now in our 70s. You're 6, 7, 8 years older than me. Would you say that your personal aging, here you are having been a guy that's been the president of all sorts of aging organizations, but now you're old yourself. You're an elder. For you, has aging been an ascent or has it been a descent?
Well, it's probably a combination. I mean, it's an ascent in the sense that I think I know something. I mean, I don't want to call it wisdom, but I have some knowledge that I can impart and that I think is useful. But then the back hurts and you have the physical limitations. I have a kayak here. I live on the water and I haven't kayaked for a couple of months because my back hurt. I mean, I think there's a combination of things, but let me put it this way. In terms of career, in terms of how I've lived life, I think about that Frank Sinatra song, the one about I have no regrets. I mean, I have regrets. I have a few, but I did it my way. And I think, unfortunately, as Thoreau said, most people lead lives of quiet desperation. And if you can say that you did it your way, now again, it may be a middle-class luxury to be saying this, so I don't mean to be presumptuous. But if you can say, I did it my way, and I didn't go after the bucks unnecessarily, I did enough to live on, that I feel really good about myself. I mean, I hope I have a few more years left, but I feel good about myself.
You hedged away from the word wisdom. You talked about knowledge. Do you believe that there's buds of wisdom popping up in your psyche somewhere?
Sure. I mean, some of the stuff about knowing yourself and feeling confident and like the Jimmy Rogers, I think it was Jimmy Rogers song said, you got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. You have to know when you've made a mistake and you need to correct it. You need to, things that I learned, for example, when I was younger on Friday afternoon, everything seemed like it was a tragedy that I had to deal with over the weekend. Ultimately, I learned that there was maybe 1 out of 100 things I actually had. The rest could wait till Monday. I learned from doctors. When you go to a doctor with a pain, they say, oh, here, take 2 aspirins and soak it and come back in 2 weeks. And usually stuff solves itself. So I've learned, and I guess that's wisdom. I mean, I'm reading a book about Stoics right now, so I'm hoping to expand my stoicism and my understanding of things like that.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a few more questions, and they're going to be kind of lightning rounds. So let's take a shot at this.
I know I talked.
No, you're fascinating in every way. What person has had the greatest impact on your life?
Well, I think Maggie in some ways, and then I went to a camp when I was 5 and 6 years old, run by a woman from Berlin who was a German Jewish refugee, and that she did too. Those were my 2. Maggie was probably the most in the field of aging. Is
there a book that you think everyone ought to read because it'll open their mind?
Well, I really like this Stoicism for Every Day, the book I'm reading right now. I think biography is, I read all the Carroll books about President Johnson. Love in the Time of Cholera. I mean, I think there are books that give you pieces of life and that you can then draw on. So I need to think more about that.
Some people have a philosophy, they have a faith, they have a belief, they have a point of view that they call sort of their master narrative. Is there a philosophy that guides you?
Well, I think it's the do unto others, and be good. I'm not a particularly religious person at all. I basically, try to do the moral thing, treat people fairly. One other piece that I taught my kids, and we had a cleaning lady, I remember, in New Mexico when we lived there, and I always cleaned the toilets, and they were wondering why I cleaned the toilets before the cleaning lady came. I said, if you ever see somebody cleaning toilets, don't think you're better than they are. You may be lucky that you don't have to clean the toilets, but so that there's a class thing, there's a feeling of valuing really everybody. I mean, when I'm in a bathroom in the airport and a guy's cleaning and he's totally being ignored, and I say, thank you for keeping it so clean, they almost fall over because I've said so.
A couple of more questions. Have you had any low or dark periods of your life, and how did you get through them?
Oh, I've had a couple of divorces, and that was, it just, again, sort of put one foot in front of the other and really tried to focus on, I was fortunate enough to have this work, and which gave me a lot of pleasure, and because of the interactions with people. So I got through them, by focusing on the work I had to do, and the connections, and the importance of it, not always succeeding at it, but the importance of it.
Okay, last couple of questions here. If you, 78-year-old Paul Nathanson, could go back and talk to the young Paul Nathanson, what advice would you give him?
Well, I think I would try to say, be more in the present, which I'm learning. I mean, I've learned, tried to do for the last several years, but be more in the present, enjoy yourself even more. And by and large, a lot of the things we've talked about, I think I feel, know how to value yourself, how to feel self-confident, but not in a pushy, overbearing kind of way. Be a good parent. I think and being a parent has taught me a lot about how to do some of that stuff, because you gotta, sort of volunteer.
So I'm going to reverse that question and say, okay, if you, the 78-year-old Paul Nathanson, could go back and have an encounter with the young you, how would the young you feel about what you've accomplished in your life?
I think pretty good. I mean, if I look back, if it's me, the young me, I would say, you were true to yourself by and large. You did good. I mean, you didn't do all good, and you made mistakes, but you were on a path that made you feel fulfilled. I'd feel pretty good about it.
And last, I got to ask this, because you have influenced various people who have influenced more people, who have caused things to happen over this half century of your work so far. How does it feel to be a person who has, at the end of the evaluation of things, you've not been a quiet guy, but you have forced and changed and altered and demonstrated and stood as an example? What does that feel like inside?
Oh, well, it feels very rewarding. I mean, we have so many people who talk, and if you can walk the talk somewhat, I feel, again, maybe this isn't what I should be saying. I feel pretty good about stuff. I feel there are gaps, there are mistakes that have been made, there are things I should have done differently, but overall, I feel pretty good.
Well, I'll say one thing in closing. So I've known you a long while now, and I know you take on really serious issues. And yet every time I'll see you at an ASA conference or at a meeting or something somewhere in the world, you always got a smile for me, and you always give me a big hug. And if your kids are there, you welcome me to them and them to me. And I would say, I just want to say congratulations to you for a life that you're living so well and so full. And thank you for taking this time, Paul.
Thank you, and thank you for doing this. And again, in many ways, the things you said about me back at you, because you've made a major change in the field of aging. You've really brought a lot of people into the field. You've mentored a lot. You've done a wonderful job, and I'm not just saying it. I mean it.
Thank you. You be well. All the best to you and your family. Take care.